That was the money shot.
Do you want to feel old? Well, Sunset Riders is nearly 33 years old. Yeah, you're welcome. As a kid, I loved the port we got for the Sega Mega Drive before discovering the vastly superior Super Nintendo version, which was far closer to the arcade original. This was Konami run-and-gun arcade action at its finest. Tight controls, colourful memorable sprites, great music, and tough boss fights. Brutal at times, but oh so much fun. Mystic Warriors was a spiritual sequel, but Sunset Riders never became a franchise like so many other Konami titles of the time. I saw Deathwish Enforcers advertised on social media a few weeks ago, and then watched some of Matt McMuscle's playthrough on his channel. I got about 3 to 5 minutes in, paused the video, and then later on that day bought the game myself. This game is an absolute love letter to Konami's gunslinging run-and-gun adventure. Not only does it play almost identical to Sunset Riders, but it feels like Sunset Riders. It's also all pretty tongue-in-cheek as well and has one hell of a sense of humour. I've played so many indie games that have taken inspiration from various favourites of mine growing up, but they've lacked that overall feel of the game. It really can be so hard to emulate. But Deathwish Enforcers? Yeah, Monster Bath Studios have absolutely nailed it. It is so close to that arcade classic that if you told me it used the same engine, or was some kind of straight-up palette swap, I'd believe you. There's even the capacity for 4-player co-op, just like the arcade version of Sunset Riders. But it's not just a love letter to Sunset Riders. Deathwish Enforcers pays homage to popular cult and exploitation cinema from the 70s and 80s predominantly. On its release, there were 4 characters to choose from, with a 5th being added for this special edition. So here they are, and the inspiration for each character. We have Filthy Larry Hardwood, which is obviously Dirty Harry Callahan from, well, Dirty Harry, played by Clint Eastwood. Chuck Bronxman is Paul Kersey from Deathwish, played by Charles Bronson. Diana Bang, God what a name, is based on Emma Peel from The Avengers and named after actress Diana Rigg. Cleopatra Love is inspired by blaxploitation characters such as Cleopatra Jones, played by Tamara Dobson. And finally, Maxwell Bondage, my god what a name, is the most obvious, bar Larry, being inspired by James Bond, and in particular, Roger Moore's portrayal. Each character has a different firearm and special attack, but also has different stats as well. Diana, for example, is the fastest character but has the weakest projectiles, while Larry is slow but an absolute powerhouse. Don't stress too much about which character to choose from though. Since the game is arcade difficult, even on normal, you'll have plenty of opportunities to try the other cast out as you have to use up all of those continues. Speaking of difficulty, there are a bunch of different levels to choose from, such as easy to very hard, or dirty as it's called here. You can also modify how many lives you start with, how many continues you're given, and how many points it takes to obtain an extra life, which means you can set yourself all manner of challenges. This is very welcome. As mentioned already, this plays exactly like Sunset Riders. Gunplay feels almost identical, you can vault up onto certain platforms, you can enter buildings to get upgrades. Both your own and enemy projectiles are easy to differentiate between themselves and the backgrounds, plus the slide mechanic is here as well. This in particular is great for avoiding all manner of attacks, with it being essential to defeat one boss in particular. A minor inclusion is a melee attack for when wrong-uns get too close, which is a very, very welcome addition. Like Sunset Riders, how many times do you think I'm going to say that? You can upgrade your firearms twice, once to give them full auto and the other to improve upon the power itself. There are 2 minigames throughout a playthrough though that allow you to permanently keep these upgrades. These see you beating the absolute piss out of a suspect. Complete them within the time limit and you'll gain the promotion, giving you these upgrades permanently. To further mix things up, there are 2 stages that take place on a motorbike. These are okay, but the correct way to approach them is by playing as either of the 2 characters with a shotgun, due to the spread giving you a distinct advantage. All of the enemy variants are what you'd expect. There's guys with knives, firearms, and dynamite throwing enemies, plus some zombie variants later on in the game, with one in particular reminding me of the half-corpse zombie from Return of the Living Dead, and anything that reminds me of that film is okay in my book.
Hurts to be dead.
Yes, there are zombies, because it's a game made in the past decade. Don't get me wrong, I love the zombie genre, love it. George A. Romero's original trilogy of the Dead contains some of my absolute favourite films of all time, and the Resident Evil series is, again, one of my all-time favourite gaming franchises. And, I just said that I liked being reminded of Return of the Living Dead, but, well, if we didn't have a game involving zombies to some degree for a year or two, I don't think I'd really have much of a problem. The subgenre is literally like a walking corpse at this moment. I didn't really quite mean to go off on that tangent. Sorry about that. The mishmashing of cult genres, while fun, is something I'm unsure as to whether it works well or not. It certainly adds that spice of variety into the mix, and it's there to pay homage to cult cinema, but I don't know. There were occasions where I felt it would have been better to have kept to the 70s gritty, schlocky crime vibe that the earlier stages took place in. The Haunted House is a nice change of pace, but while feeling like a fun nod to Splatterhouse of all things, overall it just felt equally out of place and sandwiched between the other stages. Don't get me wrong though, it's all still very enjoyable and fun to play through, but just a minor itch I felt at the back of my mind. It's more of a nitpick than anything. As I said though, it does add variety, so I don't know, what do I know? But what about the bosses? How about the bosses? It's an arcade style run and gun, so of course there are bosses and of course they're going to be very difficult. They are okay. I think that's the best way to put it. They do a decent enough job, but most I felt were just a little disappointing. The fight against Basil the Flaccid and the Grace Jones-inspired Payday are probably the standouts. The first boss, the Pawn King, plays out almost like a carbon copy to the fight with Simon Greedwell in Sunset Riders. Thankfully, the other fights do their own thing, but I still couldn't shake the feeling that they could have been better in some way, especially since the game has so much polish in every other area. But they all do have their own little gimmick for the most part. Most of these bosses are fun references to popular characters in film as well, but I'm not going to spoil the fun for anyone trying to figure those out. Some fights, such as Mikey here, were a little frustrating for me, and were full of beginners' traps. However, this is an arcade-style shooter, and those games were notoriously brutal back in the day. Surprisingly enough though, the final boss is by far the weakest and maybe easiest in the entire game. This sees the main antagonist guarded by a previous boss. You down the helicopter and then have to destroy his rather suggestive escape pod. It felt remarkably underwhelming, especially since most fights beforehand had some form of a gimmick. Very odd, but this is, again, just a minor nitpick. Thankfully, the run and gun action is still well refined and the game is incredibly enjoyable. Also, it goes without saying that this game looks absolutely brilliant, with some wonderful sprite work, environments that all look distinctive, and a wonderful use of colour throughout the experience. Even if I had a few issues with the horror-themed stages, they all look appropriately foggy and moody. Each stage feels different, with no two missions feeling like a rehash or feeling similar. The music though, well, the music is absolutely fantastic, and it only enhances the authenticity the game is going for. There are plenty of standout tracks here, and they all enhance the excitement and help push you on towards the end of the stage. And if I can highlight one in particular, the track that plays during the cemetery stage time sounds very similar to Goblin's Dawn of the Dead score mixed with Thriller by Michael Jackson. Along with the great soundtrack, the sound design is exactly what you want from a title like this. All of the gunfire, explosions, item pickups, and enemy deaths are all satisfying. It never once gets too chaotic and overbearing like so many other titles, and it all combines with everything else well to create a damn good package. To my surprise, I discovered that the original release was back in January of 2023. and I've no idea why I've only now just come across it. This game is right up my alley, and I had a lot of fun playing through it for this video. So if watching this has convinced you to pick it up for yourself, then hell, I've done something right at least. Deathwish Enforcers isn't perfect, and I had some gripes with it, but that somehow adds to the authenticity. At times it felt like I'd stumbled across a long-forgotten arcade shooter that was criminally overlooked back in the day, which, if anything, would fit in with the cult cinema it makes constant references to. It stays so true to its inspiration that at times I worry it might be to the game's detriment. There aren't really any new mechanics between this and Sunset Riders. Sure, there are screen-clearing special attacks you can acquire, but I didn't use them once during my initial playthrough, and only realised they were an option on my second playthrough. If Monster Bath Studios were to make a sequel, I'd like to see them take more risks and inject some fresh new gameplay into it to improve upon an entertaining framework. Despite all of that though, whether by yourself or a group of friends, because this is up to 4 players, this game is a great homage to arcade shooters of the past, and I was thoroughly entertained throughout. You should absolutely check this one out. And until the next video, take care everyone, and I'll see you next time. And if you don't mind, might see about getting the rest of the achievements. Catch you later.
Thank you.
Don't mind if I do.